Chapter 2. Midnight's Daughter. Claudette jerked awake with a strangled groan. She clutched her chest, trying to calm her thumping heart, which felt like at any moment it might rip free of its tether. "Breathe," she told herself. "Just breathe, you fool." The frenzied heartbeat slowed beneath her touch, and she felt centered once more. A dream. No, a nightmare. Her first. Blake was snoring softly in the next room. Claudette had to restrain herself from slapping the plaster to wake him. Intellectually, she knew nightmares weren't contagious, but that didn't stop her from blaming her brother. He'd infected her somehow with his diseased psyche. It was the only explanation. Searching for a clue to her dream's origin, Claudette warily turned over the images still lingering in its wake. The bare black trees reaching up out of the snow like skeletal hands, the snarling wolves, Blake's terrified expression. There was something here, she was sure of it, something familiar, and then it clicked. The dream was no groundless phantasmagoria. It was a memory, or at least the ghost of a memory rendered monstrous through the nightmare's prism. A lost episode from her childhood that she hadn't dwelt upon for many years. Forgotten, perhaps, until tonight. When she and Blake had been children, they'd found themselves lost near their farmhouse in Munich. A pack of wolves, shaggy, slavering creatures half mad with starvation from the long winter, had attacked them, forcing them to flee deeper into the woods. The wolves chased them through the snow until Blake spotted a tall tree that they could climb to safety. Hours later, Mother had discovered them hidden in the boughs of the tree, the wolves snapping below, and then... well, what happened next still remained clouded by time. They'd survived, that was the important thing. In the dream, Claudette and Blake had again been children lost in the woods. They were running from the wolves, and then something strange had happened. A terrible transformation had gripped Claudette's body. First her fingers had shortened, melting back into the knuckles, her hands became paws. Then coarse black hairs sprouted up and down her arms in a furry pelt. Opening her mouth to howl, Claudette had tasted blood on her lolling tongue. Blake's terrified expression and mournful cries still rang in her ears. "They're in you, Claudette! The wolves! The wolves are in you!" Now awake and feeling foolish, Claudette held her hand up in the blue dark to make sure it was still just a hand. Her skin remained smooth, no black hairs sprouted from the knuckles, no claws instead of fingernails. She was herself. Of course she was. To think otherwise would be mad. So why did Claudette feel so strange? At first she disregarded the tingling in her chest as a side effect of the dream, but now her heartbeat no longer raced. The tingling, however, had intensified, radiating out from her core. Her body was prickling in the most curious way, as though invisible fingers were lightly raking her skin. It was a not altogether unpleasant sensation, but one that made her feel hot and restless. Kicking off the bedsheets didn't help. The room was suddenly stifling. She needed to be outside. Just the thought of standing on the balcony in the cool night air was soothing. Without bothering to pull on her dressing gown, Claudette escaped into the hallway. The hands of the grandfather clock showed that it was a little after midnight. Navigating through the pitch-black hallway and the adjoining living room proved exceptionally easy. It was almost as though she was being guided through the darkness, pulled along by an invisible current towards the balcony doors. Claudette didn't question the oddness of this sensation, but merely indulged it, delighted in it. She felt connected to the dark in a way she never had before, as if some long dormant part of herself had just been awakened. Outside, the chill night air was a welcome balm against her burning skin. Drawing the night in through deep, refreshing breaths, Claudette walked to the railing and closed her eyes. The city tantalized her senses. She could taste cigar smoke and wine, smell the salt of the canal, and hear distant laughter as a carriage laden with midnight merrymakers rattled through the streets below. How she desperately wished she were among them. How she wished to be free. A strange humming filled the air and made the hairs on the back of her neck quiver. Claudette opened her eyes and gasped. She could see fine threads of green light shimmering and twisting in front of her face. The humming sound on the balcony rose in pitch, and she stumbled backwards, alarmed by the dance of light and colour. "What is—" And then all at once the light threads coalesced into one brilliant flash of emerald, as Claudette felt the balcony, the apartment, and everything else disappear. A tunnel of darkness followed, so black and infinite that Claudette was sure she'd gone blind, but then the darkness was torn asunder by another split of green lightning, and she was falling through a vast expanse of empty space towards a churning sea of clouds. This did not terrify her as it should have, not at first. To be standing on a balcony one moment, and then the next finding yourself plummeting from the heavens like a felled bird, was nearly impossible to reconcile. Claudette was numb with shock, and could only stare wide-eyed as the clouds raced towards her. Then she blinked, and the reality of the situation, as unreal as it seemed, grew suddenly clear to her. She was going to die. In seconds she would plunge through the clouds and be dashed to pieces on whatever earth lay below. No! The defiant order came from deep within her, in a voice she didn't recognize but knew was her own. Almost immediately her descent slowed. Amazed and encouraged by this miracle, Claudette willed herself to slow further. Her body obeyed, resisting the laws of gravity and pulling up short just above the vaporous surface of the clouds. She hovered in place for a moment, too astonished to do anything else. Was this magic her doing? Below, the clouds surged and rippled like water. Claudette fixed her gaze on a spot a few feet away and wheeled herself forward. Her body reacted immediately, drifting slowly towards her intended location. Laughing with delight, Claudette began to fly. Her movements, at first clumsy, soon became graceful and assured. She rose up and dove down through the air in great swooping movements, trailing her hand across the cloud mist and leaving calligraphic patterns in her wake. Yes! Sheer ecstasy. While impossible to comprehend, the experience felt truer than anything Claudette could remember. She was meant to be here above these strange clouds. She was meant to fly. Only when her wonder dimmed could Claudette take stock of her environment with more detail. The clouds seemed completely unlike any clouds she'd ever seen. The speed in which they swelled and rolled was much more like water than vapor. They were not her clouds. This was not her sky. For proof of this, Claudette only had to look upwards at the stars, which shone an unearthly green hue. Where was she?